The rain fell hard on the tin roof, like bullets from a vengeful sky. Eleanor stood by the window, watching water sluice down the glass in rippling sheets. The storm had blown in fast from the west, turning afternoon to evening in minutes. She held a photograph, creased and faded, of her father standing proud beside the barn he'd built with his own hands. His smile never reached his eyes, not even in pictures. A flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and in that instant, she saw a figure stumbling toward the house. A man, hunched against the downpour, one hand clutching his hat to his head. Eleanor squinted through the darkness. Strangers rarely came this far out. Another flash, and she saw him clearer now, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with purpose despite the weather. He reached the porch steps, and Eleanor's hand moved instinctively to the shotgun leaning against the wall. 20 years alone on this ranch had taught her caution. The knock came 3 times, firm but not demanding. Eleanor opened the door just wide enough to see him properly. Rain dripped from his hat brim and soaked his duster. "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice deep and weathered. "Sorry to trouble you. Got caught in this storm. My horse threw a shoe about 2 miles back." Eleanor's eyes traveled downward, past his rain-slicked coat to his boots. Her breath caught. The leather bore a distinctive mark, her father's cattle brand, pressed into the hide. A circle with a slash through it, like a sun being cut in half. She watched her father burn that mark into countless hides over the years. "You're welcome to wait out the storm," she said, stepping back from the door, her eyes never leaving those boots. The man called himself Caleb. He stood dripping on the worn floorboards of the entryway, hat in hand, revealing dark hair streaked with gray at the temples. Eleanor's home sat nestled in a valley between the jagged peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains, the nearest town 30 miles of bad road away. The ranch had once been the center of a thriving cattle operation. Now it was just her and a few head of cattle, enough to get by. "Thank you kindly," Caleb said, shrugging off his duster. His eyes moved around the room, taking in the saddle mounted on a stand in the corner, the faded photographs on the mantel, the smell of leather oil and wood smoke that never quite left the place. "You can hang that by the fire," Eleanor said, nodding toward his coat. The main room was exactly as her father had left it, the heavy oak table where they'd eaten every meal, the stone fireplace he'd built stone by stone, the worn leather chair where he'd sit evenings, cleaning his guns and telling stories of the old days. Sometimes Eleanor thought she could still hear his voice in the quiet hours, like it had seeped into the walls. "Been ranching long?" Caleb asked, moving toward the fire. The flames caught the angles of his face, weathered, but not unkind. "All my life," Eleanor said. "My father built this place. Started with nothing but a tent and some borrowed cattle." Sounds like a determined man. He was. Eleanor moved to the kitchen, put the kettle on the stove. "Coffee. Appreciate it." She watched him from the corner of her eye as she worked. There was something familiar in the way he stood, weight on one leg, shoulders square. It reminded her of her father in the photographs from his younger days, before the hardness set in. "Those are interesting boots," she said, keeping her voice casual. Caleb glanced down. "Had them made special, few years back. Good leather lasts if you treat it right." "That brand," Eleanor said. "Where'd you get that hide?" A flicker of something, surprise, maybe wariness, crossed his face. "Tanner in Missoula. Said it was from an old ranch that went under." "You recognize it." Eleanor poured the coffee, buying time. "It was my father's brand. Haven't seen it used in 15 years, not since he passed." Caleb accepted the mug she offered, their fingers not quite touching in the exchange. "I'm sorry to hear that. Losing family's never easy." The storm held outside, wind rattling the windows. Inside, the silence stretched between them. "What brings you to these parts?" Eleanor asked finally. "Work, mostly. I'm a leather worker by trade. Been traveling around, picking up jobs where I can find them." Caleb took a sip of coffee. "Been a hard few years. Drought killed a lot of the ranches down south. Figured I'd try my luck up this way." Eleanor nodded. Her own struggles with the land were etched into her hands, calloused and strong. "Not much work around here either. Most of the big ranches are gone now." "Yet you stayed," Caleb observed. "This land is in my blood," Eleanor said simply. "My father used to say a person's only as good as the ground they stand on." Caleb's eyes met hers. Sounds like a man who knew his mind. He did. Eleanor looked away first. "The spare room's down the hall if you want to dry off proper. Bathroom's to the right. There's towels in the cabinet." When he was gone, Eleanor stood motionless in the center of the room. Those boots. Her father had been particular about his hides, kept the best ones separate, treated them special. Said they'd be worth something someday. After he died, she'd found most of them gone from the tanning shed. She'd assumed they'd been sold off to cover his debts. But seeing that brand again, after all these years, it was like her father was suddenly present in the room, watching her with those sharp eyes that never missed a thing. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rolled across the valley. Eleanor heated up a pot of stew she'd made the day before. It wasn't much: venison, potatoes, carrots from her garden, but it would do. Caleb returned looking more human, his hair damp from washing up. They ate at the oak table, the silence between them broken only by the clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional rumble of thunder. "This is good," Caleb said, breaking the quiet. "Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal." "It's nothing special," Eleanor replied, but she felt a small warmth at the compliment. Road food makes you appreciate simple things done well. Caleb's eyes moved around the room again, lingering on a photograph of her father standing beside a prize bull. "That your father?" Eleanor nodded. "William Harker. Built this place from nothing. Had the biggest herd in the county at one point." "What happened?" "Life," Eleanor said simply. "Drought. Bad markets." He was too proud to change with the times. She hadn't meant to say that last part out loud. Caleb nodded like he understood. "Pride's a heavy thing to carry." "What about you?" Eleanor asked. "You have family somewhere?" A shadow passed over Caleb's face. "Had a wife once. Lost her in childbirth, along with our son. After that, seemed easier to keep moving." The simple tragedy of it hung in the air between them. Eleanor had never married. There had been a man once, a ranch hand who'd worked for her father. They'd planned a future together, but her father had sent him away. Said he wasn't good enough for her. By the time Eleanor worked up the courage to defy him, the man was long gone. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. Caleb shrugged, but his eyes held old pain. It was a long time ago. Later, as Eleanor washed the dishes, Caleb dried them without being asked. His hands were strong, scarred in places, a leatherworker's hands. They worked in companionable silence, and Eleanor found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of having another person in her space after so many years alone. "You mind if I ask about the brand?" Caleb said finally. "On my boots. Seems to mean something to you." Eleanor handed him the last plate. "The circle slash. My father designed it himself. Said it represented the sun being cut in half, daybreak and nightfall, the two times when a rancher's work is hardest." Thoughtful man. In some ways. Eleanor dried her hands on a towel. In others, he was as hard as the mountains out there. Didn't bend for anyone or anything. "Those types usually break eventually," Caleb said quietly. Eleanor looked at him sharply. "You sound like you speak from experience." "Let's just say I've known men like that." Caleb hung the dish towel carefully. "Thank you for the meal. And the shelter." "Storm's not letting up," Eleanor said. "You're welcome to stay the night. Spare rooms made up." That night, Eleanor lay awake listening to the rain. Down the hall, a stranger slept in her father's old room. A man wearing boots made from her father's hide. The coincidence felt too precise to be accident, yet what purpose would there be in it? She got up, moving quietly through the darkened house. In the main room, embers still glowed in the fireplace. Eleanor knelt before an old trunk in the corner, the one place she'd never fully sorted after her father died. Inside were papers, old ledgers, things she'd meant to organize but never found the heart for. By the dim light of a lamp turned low, Eleanor sifted through the remnants of her father's business. Most were familiar: cattle tallies, expense records, letters from the bank. But beneath them, she found a bundle tied with twine that she didn't recognize. Letters, yellowed with age, addressed to her father. The first was dated 20 years ago. The handwriting was neat, precise. "William," it began. "I've done as you asked. The boy knows nothing of his true parentage. My wife believes him to be ours, and I've never given her reason to think otherwise. But I cannot in good conscience continue this deception without fair compensation. The amount we discussed would secure his future and buy my silence permanently." Eleanor's hands trembled. She read another letter, then another. The story emerged in fragments: a woman her father had loved before marrying Eleanor's mother. A child born in secret. Payments made to keep it quiet. The final letter was different, angry, threatening. "You cannot simply stop the payments now that it suits you. The boy is nearly grown. He asks questions I cannot answer. If you will not honor our agreement, then perhaps your daughter should know the truth of her father's character." It was signed simply, Thomas Reeves. Eleanor sat back, letters scattered around her. Her father had a son, a half-brother she'd never known existed. The revelation shook the foundations of everything she believed about her father. The stern, principled man who'd lectured her about honor and family had hidden this secret all his life. A floorboard creaked. Eleanor looked up to find Caleb standing in the doorway, watching her. "Couldn't sleep," he said. His eyes fell to the letters. "Finding answers? Or more questions?" Eleanor said. She didn't move to hide the papers. "Did you know?" Caleb was silent for a long moment. "I knew my father wasn't my father. Found out when I was 18. He told me on his deathbed. Said a rancher named William Harker was my real father. Said Harker had paid him to raise me, then stopped when times got hard." "In the boots?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tracked down Harker years later. Came to this ranch. He was an old man by then, sick. He didn't deny it, but he wouldn't acknowledge me either. Said he'd done what he thought was right." Caleb's face was impassive in the dim light. "Before I left, I took some hides from his tanning shed. Had these boots made. Thought it was fitting, walking on something of his." The truth hung between them, raw and uncomfortable. Eleanor thought of her father, the man she'd both loved and feared, the man whose approval she'd sought her entire life. Had he looked at Caleb and seen himself? Had he been ashamed? "Why come back now?" she asked. "Wasn't planning to," Caleb admitted. "Was passing through to Missoula. The storm came up. When I saw the ranch house." He shrugged. "Maybe I wanted to see what he left behind." Eleanor looked down at the letters in her lap. He left secrets. And debts. And a daughter who spent her life trying to live up to expectations she could never meet. "Sounds like we both got the short end of his legacy," Caleb said. Eleanor gathered the letters, placed them back in the trunk. "You should get some sleep. Morning comes early around here." But as she returned to her own room, Eleanor knew sleep would elude her. The stranger down the hall was no stranger at all. He was Blood, the brother she'd never known she had. And he'd come wearing the hide of the man who denied him. Dawn broke pale and clear, the storm having spent its fury during the night. Eleanor had been up since before first light, moving through her morning chores with mechanical precision. The cattle needed feeding. The chicken coop needed checking. Work was the one constant she could rely on. She was in the barn when Caleb found her. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning light, those boots solid on the packed earth floor. "Thought you might have left," Eleanor said, not looking up from where she was mending a bridle. "Considered it," Caleb admitted. "But that seemed like running." Eleanor set down her work. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Caleb said. "I didn't come here looking for family or forgiveness or whatever else you might think. That storm was real. Finding your place was chance. But you knew who I was when you saw the ranch." "Yes." "And you let me take you in without saying a word." "Yes." Eleanor stood, dusted off her hands. "Our father was not a kind man. He was hard on those he claimed to love and harder on those he didn't. But he taught me one thing worth keeping: honesty. Something he clearly didn't practice himself." "We're not our fathers," Caleb said quietly. "Aren't we?" Eleanor challenged. "You're wearing his hide on your feet. I'm living in his house, working his land. Seems to me we're both still walking in his shadow." Caleb was silent for a moment. "Maybe that's true. But we can choose to step out of it." The morning light spilled across the barn floor between them, dust motes dancing in its beam. In the distance, a meadowlark called, its clear notes cutting through the stillness. "There's coffee in the kitchen," Eleanor said finally. "And eggs. Might as well eat before you go." They sat at the oak table again, the same places as the night before, but everything had changed. The weight of revelation hung between them, neither fully comfortable with what came next. "He never told me," Eleanor said, breaking the silence. "Not once did he ever mention having another child." "Would it have mattered if he had?" Caleb asked. Eleanor considered this. "I don't know. I'd like to think I would have sought you out. But the truth is, I was afraid of him. We all were. My father, the man who raised me, he was afraid too. Afraid of losing the money, afraid of losing face in town if people knew he'd taken payment to claim another man's child." Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. "Fear makes people do terrible things. Or not do things they should," Eleanor added. She looked at Caleb properly for the first time that morning. In the clear light, she could see their father in him, the set of his jaw, the shape of his eyes. But there was something else there too, something gentler. "What will you do now?" "Move on. Like I always do." Caleb finished his coffee. "What about you? Will you stay here?" "It's my home," Eleanor said simply. But even as she said it, she wondered if that was still true. The ranch felt different now, as if the foundations had shifted beneath her feet. After breakfast, Caleb gathered his few belongings. The storm had washed the world clean, leaving behind a crystalline sky and air that smelled of wet earth and pine. His horse was stabled in the barn, the thrown shoe replaced with one Eleanor had found in her father's old blacksmith shop. "You're good with horses," Caleb observed as she led the animal out. "Had to be," Eleanor replied. Father believed a rancher should know every aspect of the work. He was right about some things, at least. Eleanor watched as Caleb checked the cinch on his saddle. "Those boots," she said suddenly. "Do they fit well?" Caleb looked down at them, then back at her with a hint of a smile. "Well enough. Good leather forms to your feet eventually." That's what he always said. Eleanor hesitated. "I have more of his hides. In the tanning shed. Never knew what to do with them. You could sell them. Good leather's worth something. Or I could give them to someone who knows how to work them properly." Eleanor met his eyes. "If you wanted them." The offer hung between them, not quite forgiveness, not quite acceptance, but something like acknowledgement. Caleb studied her face for a long moment. "I'd be honored," he said finally. "But only if you let me make something for you in return." They walked together to the old tanning shed behind the barn. Inside, the hides hung from rafters, dark and well-preserved. Eleanor's father had been meticulous about his leather work, one of the few areas where his passion hadn't been overshadowed by his temper. Caleb ran his hands over the hides with a craftsman's appreciation. "These are beautiful." He knew what he was doing. He did, Eleanor agreed. It was the one time he seemed at peace, when he was working the leather. Caleb selected several of the best pieces, and Eleanor helped him wrap them for travel. Their hands worked in tandem, and in those moments, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of shared blood, shared history, shared wounds. "I'll be heading to Missoula," Caleb said as they finished. "I have a friend there with a workshop. I could send you something when it's done." Eleanor nodded. "I'd like that." They walked back to where his horse waited, patient in the morning sun. Caleb secured the hides behind his saddle, then turned to face her. "Thank you," he said. "For the shelter. And for this." He gestured to the hides. "Thank you for the truth," Eleanor replied. "Even if it wasn't easy to hear." Caleb mounted his horse with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to long journeys. "You know, our father once told me something. The only time we spoke. He said a Harker always pays their debts." "Sounds like him," Eleanor said, though he didn't always follow his own advice. "No," Caleb agreed. "But maybe we can do better." He tipped his hat, then turned his horse toward the road. Eleanor watched him go, a figure growing smaller against the vastness of the mountains beyond. She thought of the letters in the trunk, of the secrets her father had kept, of the brother she'd never known she had. When Caleb was no more than a speck in the distance, Eleanor returned to the house. She gathered the letters from the trunk and placed them in a small wooden box. Then she walked to the old oak tree where her father was buried, its branches spreading wide over the simple headstone. She knelt beside the grave, placing the box on the ground next to her. The earth was still damp from the storm, soft enough to dig with her hands. She scooped out a shallow hole at the base of the tree, not far from the headstone. "You should have told me," she said to the stone. "You should have given us both a chance to know each other." Eleanor placed the box in the hole and covered it with earth, patting it down firmly. The secrets would stay here, with him. What happened next would be her choice, not his. Standing, she brushed the dirt from her hands and looked toward the mountains where Caleb had disappeared. The morning sun caught on something metal in the distance, perhaps the bridle of his horse, perhaps just a trick of the light. For a moment, Eleanor considered what it would be like to leave this place, to follow that road to somewhere new. But the thought passed quickly. This land was still hers, whatever her father's failings. She would make of it what she chose. Months later, a package arrived. Inside was a pair of riding gloves, expertly crafted from her father's leather. A note accompanied them, from one Harker to another. "The debt is paid." Eleanor stood on the porch, fitting the gloves to her hands. They were perfect, supple yet strong, bearing her father's brand but shaped by her brother's skill. She looked out across the land that had defined her life, seeing it with new eyes. The sun was setting, cutting the sky in half, just like her father's brand. But tomorrow it would rise again, bringing new light to old ground. Eleanor flexed her hands in the gloves, feeling the leather give and hold, like memory, like family, like forgiveness.